This is a powerful and intense title that sets the stage for a dramatic story of redemption, consequence, and the collision of two completely different worlds. I will craft a complete, 7-part narrative based on your title, written in the third person and expanded to meet your word count requirements. The story will follow a single, coherent timeline without repetition, ensuring each part is engaging and moves the plot forward. Here is the complete story. Ia, break it! Break it! Bullies shattered her old gun, only to end up kneeling and begging the Navy SEAL for mercy. The air in the small, sun-baked town of Millbrook usually smelled of hay and distant pine forests, but in the parking lot of the Millbrook High School, it just smelled like trouble. Sarah Mendez stood perfectly still, her back pressed against the warm metal of her 10-year-old Ford Focus. Her knuckles were white as she gripped the strap of her backpack, her eyes fixed on the object in Dwayne's hands. It wasn't much to look at. It was an old, single-shot bolt-action .22 caliber rifle. The wood of the stock was scratched and dull, the bluing on the barrel worn thin from decades of careful handling. But to Sarah, it was everything. It was the last gift from her father, Master Chief Petty Officer Thomas Mendez, a Navy SEAL who was currently on his 7th deployment in a place she couldn't pronounce. See, he had given it to her on her 13th birthday, a year ago, teaching her to shoot it, to clean it, and most importantly, to respect it. "This rifle," he had said, his voice a low rumble, "was your grandfather's. It puts food on the table. It protects the home. It's not a toy, mija. It's a tool for responsibility." Today, she had made a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake. After a quick trip to the shooting range just outside town, she had stopped by the school library to return a book. She had only intended to be gone for 5 minutes. 5 minutes was all it took. When she came back to the car, Dwayne and his 2 friends, Kyle and Brett, were standing there. Dwayne, the self-appointed king of the junior class, and a boy whose sense of entitlement was matched only by his cruelty, was holding the rifle, his thick fingers wrapped around the receiver. "Well, well, look what we have here," Dwayne sneered, in his voice loud enough to attract the attention of a few other students lingering after school. "Sarah's got her little pea shooter. What's the matter, Sanchez? Your family too poor to afford a real gun?" Sarah felt a hot flush of shame and anger. "Give it back, Dwayne. That's not yours." Kyle, a wiry kid with a mean streak, snickered. "It's an antique. Look at this junk." He poked a finger at a small scratch on the stock. Sarah took a step forward, her voice trembling but firm. That was my grandfather's. My dad gave it to me. Give it back right now." Dwayne's smile widened. He loved this, the power, the fear in her eyes. "Your dad? Oh, you mean the janitor, or is he still mopping floors for the Navy?" The other boys laughed harder. Sarah's father was a source of immense pride for her, but in a town where most families had little connection to the military, it was an easy target for bullies. "He's a SEAL," Sarah whispered, and the words feeling hollow against their cruelty. "A SEAL?" Dwayne scoffed, holding the rifle up and peering down the barrel, a dangerous and idiotic move. "With a piece of junk like this? I bet he's a cook. A SEAL cook." He swung the rifle around, pointing it at a trash can. "Bang," he said softly. Then his expression hardened. He looked at the thin, worn stock, then at Sarah's desperate face. He wanted to see her break. "You know what this is?" he announced to his friends, on his voice booming again. "This is a piece of trash. It doesn't even look real. It looks like a toy my little brother would play with." He held it out in front of him, holding it at the very end of the barrel and the tip of the stock. "And you know what we do with toys that break?" Sarah's heart stopped. "No, Dwayne. Please don't." With a grunt of effort, Dwayne brought his knee up, slamming it into the middle of the rifle. The old wood, dry and stressed from decades of use, didn't just bend. It gave way with a sickening, sharp crack that echoed off the school walls. The stock snapped clean in two, the barrel and the action clattering onto the asphalt parking lot. For a second, there was silence. Dwayne looked momentarily surprised at how easily it had broken. Sarah stared at the two pieces of wood, the metal parts lying on the ground like the remains of a small animal. A sound escaped her throat, a choked gasp that was half sob, half cry of pure anguish. "Oh, man," Brett muttered, suddenly looking uncomfortable. That's messed up, Dwayne." Dwayne shook off his surprise and replaced it with a smirk. He looked down at Sarah, who had fallen to her knees, gently picking up the two halves of the stock. "Oops," he said, feigning innocence. "I guess it really was junk. It just broke." He kicked a piece of the wood away from her reaching hand. "Maybe your janitor dad can fix it with some glue." Sarah wasn't crying. Not yet. A terrifying stillness had settled over her. She looked at the pieces in her hands, then up at Dwayne. The look in her eyes wasn't sadness or fear anymore. It was a cold, quiet promise that made Dwayne take a half step back, a flicker of unease crossing his face. It was the look of someone who has just lost the most precious thing they own. "You're crazy," Kyle said, pulling at Dwayne's sleeve. "Let's go." As they backed away, trying to laugh it off, Sarah remained on her knees in the parking lot, gently cradling the broken pieces of her grandfather's rifle, the last tangible link to her father. She didn't see them leave. She didn't see the few other students who quickly averted their eyes and hurried to their cars. All she saw was the clean, jagged break in the wood, and in it she saw her father's face the next time he would ask about it. She had failed. She had been irresponsible. And it was gone. The 2,000-mile journey from the dusty streets of Millbrook to the bustling port in San Diego was a blur of recycled air and nervous energy for Sarah. Her mother, Elena, a woman with worry etched into the permanent lines around her eyes, had made the call. She hadn't told Sarah the details, just that there was news about Dad, and they needed to go. The knot of anxiety in Sarah's stomach was only partly about her father. The other part was the heavy, guilt-ridden secret of the broken rifle, and which she had carefully wrapped in an old T-shirt and hidden in her duffel bag. They were met at the naval base by a young, clean-shaven man in a crisp uniform who introduced himself as Lieutenant James Cole. He was polite, but formal, his eyes constantly scanning the area. A habit, Sarah would later learn, that never really went away. He drove them in a dark sedan onto the sprawling base, past massive gray ships that looked like floating cities, their decks buzzing with activity. Your father's a hero, Sarah," Lieutenant Cole said, breaking the silence. "You know that, right? The things he's done over there. He's why a lot of us get to come home." Sarah just nodded, her throat tight. She knew he was a hero. That's what made what she had to tell him so much worse. She was the daughter who couldn't even take care of a simple rifle. They were led to a low, unremarkable building near the piers. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of coffee and floor polish. Now they were shown into a small, windowless conference room with a table, a few chairs, and an American flag in the corner. The wait was the hardest part. When the door finally opened, Sarah's breath caught. Her father walked in, but he wasn't the man she remembered. He was thinner, his face gaunt and shadowed with a stubble he'd normally never allow. His tan uniform seemed to hang on him, but it was his eyes that were different. They were a deeper blue, like the ocean after a storm. And they held a weariness that seemed to go all the way down to his soul. Behind him, another man in a suit, a clipboard in his hand, lingered by the door before quietly closing it. "Elena! Mija!" His voice was a low rasp. He hugged his wife first, a long, silent embrace, then knelt in front of Sarah. He smelled of salt, metal, and something unfamiliar, a mix of jet fuel and desert dust. Sarah couldn't hold it in anymore. The guilt, The fear, the shame all came flooding out. She threw her arms around his neck and sobbed into his shoulder. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Tom Mendez held her tight, his own eyes closing for a moment, drawing strength from his daughter. He stroked her hair. "Shh, mija, it's okay. I'm here. It's okay." "No, it's not," she wailed, pulling back. Her face was red and streaked with tears. She fumbled with her duffel bag and pulled out the t-shirt bundle. With trembling hands, she unwrapped it on the table, revealing the two halves of the broken rifle stock, the metal action, and the barrel. The room fell silent. Elena gasped and covered her mouth. Sarah couldn't look at her father. She stared at the broken wood. "A boy at school. His name is Dwayne. He took it from my car. He was making fun of us, of you. He called you a janitor. He broke it. He said it was a toy. I'm sorry, Dad. You trusted me with it and I let them take it. I failed." She finally looked up, expecting to see disappointment, maybe even anger. What she saw in her father's face was something far more complex. For a fleeting second, a flash of pure, hard steel crossed his features. It was a look she had never seen before, a glimpse of the man who operated in shadows, the man who made split-second decisions in life-and-death situations. It was terrifying. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a deep, profound sadness. He didn't speak for a long moment. And he reached out and gently picked up the two pieces of the stock, his calloused fingers tracing the grain of the wood, the smooth spot where his own father's hand had rested countless times. He held them together, the break a raw, ugly scar. "This boy," Tom said, his voice quiet and controlled, the calm before a storm. "Dwayne, he did this? In front of people?" Sarah nodded, a fresh tear slipping down her cheek. "Yes, sir." Tom looked at the pieces in his hand for another long moment, and then set them down gently on the table. He looked at his wife, a silent communication passing between them. Then he looked back at his daughter. "Sarah, look at me." She did. "You did not fail. You made a mistake in judgment leaving it in the car. We all make mistakes, but this," he said, pointing at the broken rifle, "this is not on you. This is on him. This is an act of cruelty. It's an act meant to break a person's spirit." He stood up, his frame seeming to fill the small room. Then he walked over to the door and opened it, speaking quietly to the man in the suit. A few minutes later, Lieutenant Cole was back. "Chief, what do you need?" "Jim," Tom said, his voice still that terrifyingly calm monotone. "I need to know the leave protocol for emergency family matters. And I need a flight booked for me, my wife, and my daughter back to Millbrook. Commercial is fine. As soon as possible." Lieutenant Cole's eyebrows shot up, but he didn't question the order. "Sir, you're supposed to have a month of decompression psych evals." "I'm aware of what I'm supposed to do, Lieutenant," Tom said, turning those stormy eyes on the younger man. Lieutenant Cole straightened up immediately. "Yes, sir. I'll get on it right away, sir." He left the room at a near run. Sarah stared at her father, stunned. "Dad, what are you going to do?" Tom Mendez walked back to his daughter and put a heavy hand on her shoulder. He looked at the broken rifle on the table, and then back at her. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath his ear. "Mija, your grandfather bought that rifle to feed his family during the Depression. He kept it oiled and clean through a world war. He taught me to shoot with it in the hills of Virginia, and I taught you. That rifle isn't just wood and steel. It's history. It's honor. And this boy, he thinks he can just break that?" He shook his head slowly. "No. He needs to understand that some things you just don't touch. Some things you don't break, and he's about to learn that lesson." The tan sedan from the base pulled up to the curb in front of Millbrook High School just as the final bell was ringing. The timing was deliberate. Tom Mendez wanted an audience, He stepped out of the car, and even in plain civilian clothes, dark jeans, a simple polo shirt, he was an unmistakable figure. It was the way he held himself, the straight-backed posture, the predatory stillness. The way his eyes swept the scene and took in every detail in a fraction of a second. He was a man utterly in control of his surroundings, and the teenagers spilling out of the school felt it instantly. Conversations faltered, feet slowed to a stop. Sarah got out of the car behind him, her mother's hand a reassuring presence on her arm. She felt a strange mix of mortification and exhilaration. Her father was here. The whispers started immediately. "Who's that? Is that Sarah's dad? Whoa, he looks intense." Tom's gaze was fixed on the small group of boys loitering near the flagpole, exactly where Lieutenant Cole's preliminary research had indicated they'd be. Dwayne was holding court, laughing loudly about something. As Tom approached, the laughter died in his throat. He saw the man walking towards him, and for the first time in his spoiled, protected life, Dwayne felt a flicker of genuine, primal fear. This wasn't a teacher or an angry parent. This was something else. Tom stopped about 10 feet from the group. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Dwayne," he said. It wasn't a question. Dwayne puffed up his chest, a reflexive, stupid gesture. "Yeah, that's me. Who's asking?" "I'm Senior Chief Petty Officer Thomas Mendez, United States Navy," Tom said, his voice like gravel. "I'm Sarah's father." Kyle and Brett immediately took a step back, distancing themselves from their friend. Dwayne faltered. "Oh, hey, Mr. Mendez. Look." And about the other day. Tom cut him off. He reached into the canvas bag he carried and pulled out the two halves of the rifle stock. He held them up for everyone to see. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered students. "Did you do this?" Tom asked, his voice still quiet. Dwayne looked around for support, found none. His face was pale. "It was an accident," he stammered. "It was old. It just broke." Tom's eyes didn't leave Dwayne's. "No, it didn't just break. You broke it. You put your hands on something that didn't belong to you, and you destroyed it. That wasn't an accident. That was a choice." He took a step closer. "This rifle has been in my family for over 80 years. It belonged to my father. He carried it through the Battle of the Bulge. He used it to survive. And now, because you thought it was funny, it's in 2 pieces." Dwayne swallowed hard. "I'm sorry, okay? I'll pay for it." Tom shook his head slowly. "You can't buy 80 years, son. You can't buy history. You can't buy the memory of a man's father." He looked at the broken pieces in his own hands, then back at Dwayne. "Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to fix it." Dwayne blinked. "Fix it? How? I don't know how to fix a gun." "No," Tom agreed. "You don't. But I do. And you're going to learn. You're going to come to my garage every day after school for the next 2 weeks. You're going to learn how to refinish wood, how to true the action, now how to oil the metal. You're going to put this rifle back together with your own 2 hands, and when you're done, you're going to hand it back to my daughter, and you're going to apologize to her. Not to me, to her." Dwayne looked horrified. The thought of spending his afternoons doing manual labor, of being seen as someone who was being punished, was worse than any grounding. "No way. You can't make me. My dad will call the cops." Tom Mendez smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of a predator. "Please call him. In fact, I insist. Tell him a Navy SEAL, fresh off a deployment, is asking for a moment of his time to discuss his son's act of vandalism and destruction of personal property worth over $5,000 in sentimental value. We can do this my way, quietly and respectfully, or we can do it the official way, with police reports, a juvenile record, and a court date. It's your choice, son. But make no mistake, one way or another, You will make this right." Dwayne looked at the hard, unyielding face of the man in front of him. He looked at the two halves of the rifle. He saw the unwavering determination in Sarah's eyes, standing behind her father. He was trapped. For the first time in his life, his usual tactics of bullying and bluster had met an immovable object. His shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him. He looked down at the ground, his voice a barely audible mumble. "Okay." Tom's expression didn't change. "No, okay, what?" Dwayne looked at Sarah, his face a mask of humiliation. "Okay, Sarah, I'll fix it." Sarah didn't smile. She just held his gaze, and in that moment she understood the quiet power her father wielded. It wasn't about physical strength. It was about principle and the absolute refusal to let an injustice stand. The first few days in the Mendez garage were a masterclass in silent suffering for Dwayne. The garage was immaculate, every tool hanging in its place, the workbench spotless. It smelled of oil, sawdust, and the faint, metallic scent of steel. Tom Mendez was a patient, but relentless teacher. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His quiet disappointment was far more effective than any shout. Day 1 was about disassembly and assessment. Tom made Dwayne sit on a stool and watch as he carefully, meticulously, took the rifle's action apart. He explained each part, its function, its history. "This is the firing pin," he'd say, holding up a small piece of steel. "This little piece of metal is the difference between dinner and an empty belly. It's the difference between life and death." Dwayne, for once, listened in silence, his bravado completely gone. By day 3, Dwayne was working. Tom had him carefully sanding the two halves of the broken stock, showing him how to follow the grain of the wood, how to feel for imperfections. His hands, used only to gripping video game controllers and shoving other kids, they were clumsy and soft. He got blisters. He complained once, and Tom just looked at him. "You broke it, you fix it." Dwayne didn't complain again. Sarah would sometimes sit on an old cooler by the garage door, watching. At first it was to gloat, to enjoy his humiliation. But as the days wore on, her feelings shifted. She watched Dwayne struggle, watched the frustration, and then slowly, a dawning concentration on his face as he focused on a task. He wasn't a monster, she realized. And he was just a stupid, cruel kid who had never been held accountable for anything. Her father was teaching him more than how to fix a gun. He was teaching him patience, respect, and the value of hard work. The second week, they moved to the metal. Tom taught Dwayne how to clean the barrel, how to use steel wool on the small spots of rust, how to oil the metal parts so they moved smoothly. "See that?" Tom said after Dwayne had successfully reassembled the bolt. "That click? That's the sound of a job done right. That's the sound of something working the way it's supposed to, because you put the work in." On the final Friday, the work was done. The stock had been sanded smooth, the two halves glued and clamped with a precision that would make a carpenter proud. The metal was clean and oiled, the action smooth as silk. Tom had Dwayne reassemble the entire rifle one last time. When he was finished, he held it up. It wasn't new. Now, the scratches and dings of 8 decades were still faintly visible under the new finish. But it was whole again. In fact, it was stronger. The repair, visible as a faint dark line where the wood had been joined, was now a part of its story. Tom took the rifle from Dwayne and inspected it, his face giving nothing away. He worked the bolt, sighted down the barrel. Finally, he nodded once. "Good work." Dwayne let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He looked exhausted, that his hands stained with oil and varnish, but in his eyes there was something new, a flicker of pride. Tom called out, "Sarah, come here." Sarah walked into the garage. Tom held the rifle out to his daughter. She took it, her hands wrapping around the stock. It felt different, warmer somehow. She ran her fingers over the repaired seam. It was a scar, yes, but it was a scar that told a story of resilience, not of victimhood. Tom turned to Dwayne. His voice was still quiet. Oh, but the steel was gone from it. "Now, son, you have something to say." Dwayne stood there, his hands shoved in his pockets. He looked at Sarah, then at the rifle in her hands. This was the hardest part. He took a deep breath. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I was a jerk. I don't know why I did it. I wanted to show off, I guess. I didn't think about what it meant to you, about your grandpa or your dad. I'm sorry. Really." He looked up at her, his eyes genuinely pleading for her to believe him. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. She saw a different boy than the one who had sneered at her in the parking lot. She saw a boy who looked tired, humbled, and maybe a little bit wiser. "Okay," she said softly. "I forgive you." Relief flooded Dwayne's face. Tom Mendez put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Dwayne, you made a mistake. A bad one. But you owned up to it, and you worked to fix it. That's more than most men ever do. I'm proud of you for that." He extended his hand. Dwayne looked at it, then shook it, his grip firm. It was a handshake between men. As Dwayne walked out of the garage and headed home, a changed person, Sarah looked at her father. "You were amazing, Dad." Tom shook his head. "No, mija. You were. You had the courage to tell me the truth, even when you were scared. That's the hardest thing of all. I'm the one who's proud." He wrapped an arm around her, and together they looked at the old rifle. Its scar a testament to the fact that even broken things could be made whole again, sometimes even stronger than before. The repaired rifle sat in a place of honor on Sarah's desk, no longer just a tool, but a symbol of a hard-won victory. The story of what happened in the Mendez garage spread through Millbrook High School like wildfire. But the narrative had shifted. Dwayne, once a feared bully, was now largely ignored. His power had evaporated the moment he had been seen humbled. He is working with his hands and offering a genuine apology. He walked the halls a quieter, more solitary figure, and the subtle tyranny he had once exerted was gone. For Sarah, the change was even more profound. The shy, fearful girl who had cowered in a parking lot was gone. In her place was someone who walked with a little more confidence, who met the eyes of others without flinching. She had learned that true strength wasn't about being the loudest or the meanest. It was about integrity. It was about standing up for what was right, and about the quiet, unshakable support of family. She threw herself into her schoolwork and, at her father's suggestion, joined the school's new marksmanship club, where she discovered she had a natural talent and a calm focus that impressed even the coach, a retired Marine. Tom Mendez, however, was struggling. The decompression time he had sacrificed to come home and face Dwayne was catching up with him. The memories he had tried to outrun were patient. And they waited in the quiet moments. They came at night. It started with the dreams. He would wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of a scream in his ears, the phantom smell of cordite and blood in his nostrils. He saw faces, friends he had lost, and enemies he had confronted. The faces were always young, always caught in that split second between life and death. One face, in particular, haunted him. It was the face of a young man, little more than a boy, in a dusty Iraqi village. And it was a moment of chaos, a split-second decision that had saved his team but had left that boy on the ground. It was the right call, the tactical call, the one that kept his men alive. But knowing it was right didn't stop the face from appearing in his dreams. During the day, he was fine. He could focus on tasks, on his family, on the mundane routines of life on leave. But the hypervigilance, a survival mechanism honed over 2 decades, wouldn't turn off. A car backfiring in the street would have him halfway to the floor before his brain registered the sound. A sudden movement in his peripheral vision would make his heart rate spike. He hid it well, but Elena, his wife, knew. She saw the distance in his eyes, the way he would sometimes stare at nothing, his jaw tight. She held him at night when the nightmares woke him, her presence an anchor in his turbulent sea. One afternoon, Sarah came home from school to find her father sitting alone in the garage, the same garage where he had taught Dwayne a lesson. He wasn't working on anything. He was just sitting on a stool, staring at the wall. The old rifle, the one he had helped fix, was in his hands. He was running his thumb over the repaired seam in the stock, back and forth, a repetitive, soothing motion. Sarah stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. He looked smaller than she remembered, and the weight of unseen things pressing down on his shoulders. She walked in quietly and sat down on the cooler, the same spot she had watched Dwayne from. She didn't say anything. After a long minute, Tom spoke, his voice a low rasp. "You know, your grandfather used to tell me that a man's hands can only fix what's in front of him. A broken stock, a leaky faucet. But some things you can't fix with your hands." Sarah listened, her heart aching for him. Tom continued, on his gaze still on the rifle. "Over there. We see things. We do things. Things that have to be done, to keep each other alive. And you tell yourself it's the job. It's what you signed up for. And you come home, and you're supposed to just be normal. But the things you've seen, they're still there. They're always there." He finally looked at her, and she saw a vulnerability in his eyes she had never seen before. It scared her more than his anger ever could. "I'm proud of you, Sarah," he said. "Prouder than you'll ever know. You faced a bully and you won, not with your fists, but with your heart. You're stronger than I am in so many ways." Sarah got up and went to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You're the strongest person I know, Dad," she whispered fiercely. "You just have to let us help you carry it." He held her tight, his body trembling slightly. In the quiet of the garage, with the repaired rifle in his lap and his daughter in his arms, Senior Chief Petty Officer Thomas Mendez finally let himself feel the weight of all he carried. And for the first time in a long time, it felt just a little bit lighter. The soft chime of the doorbell was an innocent sound, but in the Mendez household, it sliced through the afternoon calm like a knife. Sarah was in the kitchen, helping her mother prepare dinner, the aroma of simmering spices filling the air. Tom was in the living room, pretending to read a book, though his eyes hadn't moved down a page in an hour. Elena wiped her hands on a towel and went to answer it. Standing on their porch was Dwayne, but this was not the Dwayne of old. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes red-rimmed and wild with fear. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Behind him, looking equally haggard but trying to maintain a facade of stern authority, stood his father, a heavy-set man in a rumpled business shirt. Elena's welcoming smile faltered. "Can I help you?" "Mr." Harrison, Dwayne's father, stepped forward. "Mrs. Mendez, I'm sorry to bother you at home. I'm Frank Harrison. This is my son, Dwayne. We need to speak with your husband. It's an emergency." Before Elena could respond, Tom appeared in the hallway. He took one look at the pair on his doorstep, and his entire demeanor shifted. The weary man from the garage was gone. In his place was the seal, his eyes sharp, his posture alert. He saw the terror in Dwayne's eyes, the desperate, hunted look of prey, and he knew that look. He'd seen it on the faces of captured insurgents. "Come in," Tom said, his voice calm but commanding. He led them into the living room. Dwayne couldn't stand still. He paced, his hands shaking. Mr. Harrison spoke, his voice tight with worry. "Mr. Mendez, we need your help. My son. He's gotten himself into serious trouble. There are men. They're going to kill him." Tom's eyes narrowed. Start from the beginning. Dwayne finally found his voice, a cracked, terrified whisper. It's about the gun thing. After what happened here, with you, I stopped hanging out with Kyle and Brett. But they got in with some older guys, bad guys. They're in a gang, I think. They sell stuff. Drugs, maybe. He took a shuddering breath. They heard about what happened. About me getting humiliated, about the rifle. They thought it was funny, but then they saw you. They saw you were a SEAL. Mr. Harrison took over. Somehow, they got it into their heads that Dwayne here is connected to you, that he knows things. They came to our house last night, 2 of them. They threatened my son. They said that since he was friends with a Navy SEAL, he must know about his schedule, his routines, when he might be alone. They wanted him to spy for them. They said if he didn't, or if he went to the police, they'd burn our house down with us in it. Dwayne looked at Tom, his eyes pleading. I told them I didn't know anything. I told them I wasn't your friend, that you hated me. But they didn't believe me. They said I had 1 week to get them information or else. They're not kids, Mr. Mendez. They're grown men. They have guns. The room was silent. Elena had a hand over her mouth. Sarah stared at Dwayne, her anger at him completely replaced by shock and fear for him and his family. Tom's expression was unreadable. He looked at Dwayne, who was on the verge of tears, then a boy utterly broken by a threat far beyond his comprehension. He looked at Mr. Harrison, a father who had come to the one man he thought could help, swallowing his pride completely. Tom leaned forward, his voice a low rumble. Did you recognize them? Do you know their names? Where they hang out? Dwayne nodded frantically. One of them, the one who did all the talking, his name is Marcus. He drives a black truck. I've seen him at the old quarry outside town. Kids go there to party. He runs things there. Tom stood up. The decision was made in an instant. This wasn't about Dwayne anymore. This was about a threat to his family, to his home. These men had crossed a line. They had brought their violence to his doorstep. He walked over to a locked cabinet in the corner of the living room, one Sarah had never seen him open. He spun the dial with practiced ease, and the heavy door swung open. Inside, neatly arranged, were firearms. Not the old rifle in Sarah's room, but modern, serious tools. He pulled out a 12-gauge shotgun and a box of shells. He turned to face the Harrisons. His eyes were cold, hard, and absolutely focused. Frank, you and Dwayne are going to stay here tonight. You're not going home. I'll make some calls. This Marcus and his friends, they made a mistake. They picked the wrong house. He looked at Dwayne, and for the first time, there was no judgment in his gaze, only the grim certainty of a man preparing for battle. You did the right thing coming here, son. Now, let's end this. The old quarry was a scar on the landscape, a place of deep cold water and sheer rock walls, littered with the detritus of teenage parties, broken bottles, faded beer cans, and the ashes of old campfires. It was also, as Dwayne had said, the unofficial headquarters for Marcus and his crew. Tom Mendez had done more than make calls. He had activated a network. Within hours, Lieutenant Cole had arrived from the base, and no longer in his dress uniform, but in jeans and a dark jacket, his eyes just as watchful as Tom's. Another man, a retired master-at-arms who now worked private security, joined them. They were a small, quiet, and utterly professional unit. They spent the night at the Mendez house, maps spread on the kitchen table, talking in low, measured tones. Sarah watched from the hallway, her heart pounding. She saw her father transform before her eyes. The weary, struggling man was gone, replaced by a commander. He was calm, precise, and in complete control. He was doing what he was trained to do, and the purpose gave him a clarity that had been missing for weeks. The plan was simple, elegant, and legal. There would be no vigilante justice. They were setting a trap, but for the police. Dwayne, wired with a hidden microphone provided by Lieutenant Cole, would go to the quarry the next night. He would tell Marcus he had information, that he was scared and ready to cooperate. When Marcus made his threats again or demanded specifics, they would have it all on tape. The local police, already alerted and working with Cole, would be waiting just out of sight. The night was cold and clear. Sarah and her mother were hidden in the back of the retired Master-at-Arms SUV parked.